to the Hudson Valley Pattern for Progress program, Strategies for Pressing Play, Sharing Tools for Success When New York Unpauses. This panel discussion assembles professionals who are not only knowledgeable, but have a breadth of perspective and experience in the Hudson Valley. I am pleased to serve as moderator. My name is Richard O'Rourke. I am a principal member of Keane and Beane PC, a general civil practice law firm with a substantial practice in the areas of land development, municipal and environmental law, and litigation. I am pleased to introduce the 5 panelists that will be discussing timely topics. Jennifer Gray is a member with the law firm of Keane and Beane PC. Jennifer's practice is devoted to planning, zoning, and litigation pertaining to land use, municipal, and real estate matters. She regularly appears before municipal boards on behalf of developers, businesses, franchises, and individuals. She also serves as counsel to local planning and zoning boards throughout the Hudson Valley, from Red Hook to Rye Brook. Czajka is the Senior Vice President for Research and Development and Community Planning for Pattern for Progress, and also is the Executive Director of the Center for Housing Solutions and Community Initiatives. Joe is recognized throughout the Hudson Valley for his expertise on housing policy and trends, and has served on numerous community development and housing commissions, boards, and task forces. Joe is so well versed in demographics and their impacts on population change and trends that I consider him to be a walking encyclopedia of knowledge. Our next panelist is Ken Carney, founder and president of Carney Realty and Development Group. Ken has 23 years of experience and has brought to the Hudson Valley more than $300 million in housing projects, as well as commercial development that are in the ground or on various stages of development. Carney Development Group has successfully developed over 1,300 housing units that include senior, workforce, veteran, supportive, market rate, middle income, and artist housing. Brandy Nelson is a professional engineer with the civil engineering firm of Czajka and Beane, located in Rhinebeck, New York. She has over 20 years of experience on a variety of projects and assists clients through every stage of development of the development process, from due diligence and site selection through design, construction, and permitting for residential, agricultural, commercial, institutional, and industrial development projects. She also serves as a municipal engineer. Our final panelist is Peter Farrow, who is a senior technical director of AKRF Inc. in his White Plains office. Peter works for public and private clients on land use, planning, zoning, master planning, environmental reviews, and GIS-based mapping. He manages some of the firm's most complex assignments involving multi-jurisdictional geographic boundaries, overseeing teams of consultants, and multi-agency review. Peter is a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners, AICP, and serves as the Hudson Valley East representative for the American Planning Association's New York Metropolitan Chapter. I will call each panelist to answer questions pertaining to our topic. After each panelist has spoken, I intend to provide an opportunity for panelists to give additional insights or respond to something he or she has heard from another panelist. So let's get to it, and welcome panelists. We're going to start with you, Jennifer. With the region on pause, resulting in many planning boards canceling meetings and courts closed for new filings, it is important to preserve certain rights. Under our current legal landscape, how can we preserve rights to existing approvals, preserve rights to challenge denials, and use this time to most effectively move the project forward at any stage, given the numerous executive orders that have been promulgated by the governor? So let's start with that. I mean, we've gone through a tremendous transformation in terms of meeting and trying to move forward economic development in the state of New York. So what pearls of wisdom do you have for us?
Thank you for that introduction, Rick. First, I want to say thank you to Pattern for Progress for this opportunity to speak to you all today, and it's an honor to serve with my fellow panelists as well. I want to start out by saying the obvious, that these are some crazy and difficult times that we're living in. But the craziness and the difficulty will not last forever. We will come out of this. And when we do, we want to move forward cautiously for sure, but also effectively, efficiently, and with a purpose and vision. And that's what we want to discuss today. You know, what should we expect when we quote unquote press play? And how do we best position ourselves to hit the ground running? The question that Rick raised regarding preserving your rights with respect to existing approvals, preserving rights to challenge approvals, that gets to one of the first topics I want to discuss today, which is kind of a potpourri of legal issues. And with respect to that potpourri, preserving your approvals is a really important thing to keep in mind. There's a lot of information being circulated with respect to the staying of deadlines and expiration dates. If you have an approved project, as always, you want to make sure you're keeping track of your deadlines and expiration dates. The governor's numerous executive orders have stayed a lot of these deadlines, but local entitlements are not included. So these entitlements remain subject to any applicable expiration period. So even if your municipality is not currently holding planning board meetings or zoning board meetings, if you have an expiration date coming up, submit your written request to have that extended. Once the board meetings are back up and running, the request can be granted retroactively. So how do you know if your approval is subject to an expiration period? Some are not. You need to check your written resolution and check the municipal code. This is extremely important because if you blow an expiration date, you may end up losing your entitlement that you worked so hard for, and you may be starting off at square one again, which is not a situation any of us want to be in. The other procedural legal issue I wanted to talk about in my potpourri category is statute of limitations. One of the governor's executive orders told certain statutes of limitations in New York State. That means that if a board denied your application, be it site plan, subdivision, variance, the typical time in which you would need to file your Article 78 proceeding in New York State Supreme Court to challenge that denial has essentially been put on pause until June 6th. In fact, courts in the 9th Judicial District, which covers most of the lower Hudson Valley, will not even accept the filing of a new lawsuit that's deemed non-essential at this time. So the point is that if you intend to challenge that denial that you recently received from a local board, you need to keep an eye on the deadline for commencing that legal action against the board because rules are changing at a rapid pace. And those statutes of limitation for commencing the legal action against the board can be very short as 30 days. So with that, those were some of the potpourri legal issues that I think Rick addressed your question.
Well aware of SECRA, the State Environmental Quality Review Act, and I understand that the most recent edition, the 4th edition of the SECRA handbook has just been released by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, I guess within the last 2 or 3 weeks. But what we have, quite frankly, as a practitioner who's somewhat seasoned at this, we have a situation where we have to streamline SECRA, in my opinion. We have a set of circumstances presenting themselves now. What do you do with a restaurant that wants to expand outdoor seating? What do you do in terms of trying to change a site plan that perhaps provides for housing or seating in a certain way? All of these things tend to come to a head as we unpause and we break out of this cocoon, this problem that we've experiencing presently. Do you have any thoughts or any suggestions in terms of how do we implement this? How do we get New York going again?
Thank you, Rick. That is an excellent question. As you said, more often than not, SECRA is what tends to bog down an application from moving swiftly through the process, through the review process. This has long been a challenge and a topic of discussion, but I think it's relevant now almost more than ever as we want to try to get projects up and going and spur the economy. Just a little background, I'm assuming that most people on the call know SECRA, but SECRA is a collection of regulations governing environmental review of actions before various state and local boards and agencies. For the purposes of today's discussion, I'm going to assume that callers have a general familiarity with SECRA. I could probably spend this entire hour talking about procedural and substantive compliance with SECRA, but that's not what you're tuned in to listen to. I think that, streamlining of the SECRA process, as we come out of this pause period in New York, we're going to be met with a host of variables that are going to make streamlining even more important. As businesses close, as tenants vacate, whether it be retail tenants, office tenants, and overall consumer spending dips, we're going to be faced with a dire need for ratables in many of our municipalities. With unemployment that's going to be at an all-time low, we're also going to have a real need to create some jobs. And given these factors, I think that applicants and municipal boards alike are going to want to find a way to work together to make the review process more efficient than ever, while obviously maintaining the integrity of the substantive review of the application. So how do we do this? I think in part the answer lies on both sides of the table. First, I think that applicants need to come to the table prepared. Do your homework. Meet with municipal staff and consultants before filing your application. Do a lot of that legwork before you even file. Determine as best you can up front what the project's main issues are going to be and address those issues head on. Provide conclusive proof that the issue is not really an issue. For example, if you know your project is going to engender concerns about traffic, submit a traffic impact study up front at the start of your review process. Consult with the municipal traffic engineer to make sure that that traffic impact study is, meets with the parameters that the municipality is looking for, and put the issue to rest with that conclusive professional opinion before it grows legs. On the other side of the table, I think boards need to come to the table remembering at least three things. And these are three things that have been discussed in countless New York State court decisions. And that is one, that SECRA is governed by a rule of reason. I think that sometimes gets forgotten as we're going through the SECRA process. Above all else, in many instances, I think this concept of reasonableness needs to be restored to the process. Second, not every conceivable environmental issue needs to be studied. And third, boards should really be relying on their professional studies and versus lay opinion in making their decisions. But on the streamlining issue, I also want to bring up something that I think most people know, and that is that last year, as of June 1, the SECRA regulations were amended for the first time in over 20 years with pretty substantive amendments. The intent of those amendments was actually to streamline the process. DEC sought to accomplish this through a couple of measures. We're not going to have time to talk about all of them today, but one of those measures was to add a couple categories, more than a couple, but quite a few categories of projects to the Type 2 list. Those are projects that categorically have been determined by DEC to not result in any significant adverse environmental impact. Therefore, no environmental review required. One of those actions, and I'm paraphrasing here, is the reuse of a structure where the proposed use is permitted by zoning, including a special use permit, and the action doesn't exceed the any type 1 threshold. So this means that you could take an existing building, repurpose it with a new use, even if that use is more intensive than the prior use with respect to traffic, generation of school-age children, any of those SECRA topics that we always talk about. And you are not going to be required to go through a SECRA review. You may need to prove out lack of impacts through some local code provisions, but SECRA will not be required. And I think as we're bouncing back from this pandemic and trying to restart our economy, this may be a useful tool for certain projects to hit the ground running. It's not going to create 500 construction jobs, but if you can reuse existing infrastructure for use permitted by zoning, you may be able to navigate that application relatively quickly through the application process. I hope that answers your question, Rick.
Jennifer, thank you very much. And that's an excellent point in terms of the repurposing of buildings and uses, because clearly, as we emerge from this, and this is where Czajka, who's our next panelist, can address. I mean, obviously, there's going to be a change in market trends. I think that there's going to be a self-analysis in terms of what's going to happen with buildings that have lots of offices, and maybe we're going to see some repurposing, which has already started. But anyway, Joe, what market trends are you anticipating in terms of the residential and the commercial context as we hopefully come out of this terrible situation? Joe?
Sure. Thanks, Rick, and thanks for asking me to participate in today's panel. This is a lot of fun for me. As you know, I'm a data guy, a policy guy, and putting it all together is what I call fun. So I'm going to try to summarize a lot of things very quickly. And so I'm going to speed through some things, and if there's any further question later, we can maybe circle back to that. So I've been working in community development and housing for just over 30 years, and I've been involved with revitalizing neighborhoods after minor recessions, after major recessions, after natural disasters up in Sullivan County, and a housing bubble that burst, which resulted in thousands of families in the Hudson Valley losing their homes to foreclosure. And in many of the counties, there was an upwards of 30 to 40% loss of value in the housing market after the crash. So today, where are we? We're facing an incredibly devastating illness that affects every aspect of our lives, including health, food, employment, and most critical, shelter or housing. The economic impact due to the pandemic is totally different than all of these other economic downturns that we've seen before. I'm asked a lot of questions about housing, the real estate market, and how will recovery look. So there's two ways of looking at today's state of affairs. You can look at it as a pessimist, or you can choose to look at it as an optimist. So I'm reminded of an old line in a West Wing episode. The pessimist says, "Everything's terrible. It can't get any worse." The optimist replies, "Oh, yes, it can." So with that said, I try to look for what we call silver linings in bad situations. So let me try to frame my answers in a way that looks at the glass as half full. Things are rapidly changing. Every day we hear new news, new reports, new information. Market reports come in from a multitude of resources. No one has a crystal ball and everyone has an opinion. The best market report is the one at the end that's correct. All the others really don't matter. The problem is you don't know that until after the fact. So here's what I know. Let's talk about the market trends. Before COVID-19, the real estate market in 2020 started out very strong. The lower and middle end of the market had strong sales with rising prices, and we were in what's called a seller's market, less than 6 months supply in most residential markets. The high end of the market, which was really a little bit softer than in previous years, probably had an impact due to the SALT cap, the state and local tax exemptions that were changed in the 2019 tax law. But the SALT cap is really, it's getting priced back into the market, and both buyers and sellers have adjusted to those numbers. We were in a seller's market, which means low inventory, but there was solid pricing with good appreciation over the past few years. Interest rates are still unbelievably low. Yesterday, Freddie Mac just published the 30-year fixed rate at 3.25%. I can remember back in 1981 when my brother bought his first house, he was paying 18% interest. And at that point, it was a good deal. Today, 3.25. It's almost like the bank's paying you to take their money. Not really. Although inventory has been low, the number of sales has been growing, which is healthy. So let's look at the residential real estate market a little differently. Under the pandemic concerns, current affairs, unemployment skyrocketed, some 16 million people, right? Businesses have been shut down. People have lost money in the stock market. It's gone from almost 30,000, went down to 18 or 19,000. Now it's hovering around 23, 24,000. So a lot of value lost there. However, there are people still working and the demand for homes is still there. Realtors are also describing the phenomena of people living in a highly dense city and wanting to get out of into the suburbs. But not everyone. That's not for everybody. Some people still want the urban center living environment. There are anecdotal stories of people buying sight unseen. Banks are reporting a healthy stream of refis, and again, they are seeing new mortgage loan applications being submitted. Realtors and attorneys are conducting business very differently. There are virtual showings. There's tents being set up in parking lots to conduct closings. Very interesting models, very creative, which goes to the resiliency of the people that live here and operate in New York State and in the Hudson Valley. There are other challenges due to the municipal buildings being closed and construction is basically shut down, except for affordable housing. It is shut down. Municipal records are difficult to obtain, and repairs may be put off as a contingency to the sale because contractors are just unable to get into homes to make improvements or repairs for the sale. But the market is adjusting, and so are those working in the real estate industry, those professionals. So as a result, the number of sales are down. But all these factors are contributing to what's called a pent-up demand that will hopefully bust loose in the near future. Many of the millennials are now in their early to late 30s, and they may not want to live in an apartment anymore. They may have just gotten married, they want to start their own family, so they're going to need a house. The other phenomena that is taking place as a result of the pandemic is the increase in remote work. How does that play into the formula? Well, the traditional 9-to-5 office model has changed. Businesses and employees are basically forced into this new paradigm of working remotely. Just like on this Zoom forum, we get to see everyone's living room, everyone's kitchen, everyone's makeshift home office. Many are figuring it out, and it is working. So remote work is another factor that may add to people leaving the high dense city. Over the last few years, there seemed to be a trend to build smaller homes. The large McMansions, if you will, are seeing a smaller demand. Due to remote work, people will need more space. So perhaps the demand for larger homes will increase and push for redesigning homes to include office space and even other interior amenities that allows people to stay home. So home gyms, media rooms, and the like may be in high demand. This is good for the remodeling industry as well. Another factor to consider for those still in the housing market, the people leaving a rental complex may also be looking for a home with little maintenance. If you're living in an apartment for the past 2, 3, 5, maybe even 10 years, you're not used to taking care of property. You don't have that skill set. So townhomes may become an alternate to what was called transit-oriented development, which is a high-dense residential development on a transit line like a train or a bus station, typically with lots of amenities and lots of common space, pools, gyms, laundry facilities, all sorts of very interesting things that are really creating a lifestyle for a renter. A townhome may offer these amenities, but it also has one very different piece to it. It has a private entrance for those who may still be concerned about social distancing. As bad as things are now, people will get back to work, and as things open and the market turns up, it's going to come back. We know it's going to come back. The question is when and how. So will there be an exodus from the city? We see some early signs, anecdotally, and there is some hard data. So let me just go back to remote work for a minute. Pre-COVID-19, remote work was not well received. Some professions had the ability, and some companies were willing to manage that style of work, but it was few and far between. Times have changed, and businesses and managers had to quickly embrace remote work. I believe that many companies and employees have determined that it is a workable model. On the social side of things, what does remote work mean? Well, it means no commute or a reduced number of days commuting. This will either increase work time or it'll increase family and volunteer time. So perhaps communities looking for volunteers to sit on planning boards, zoning boards, school boards, they'll now have a wider range of people to select from. Remote work will also have a big impact on the office space market. So a little bit more into the commercial aspect. For the last decade or so, office parks have been suffering. Many have gone through an adaptive reuse, as you mentioned, and are now used for housing. They're used for other commercial, retail, entertainment purposes. Office space markets will likely suffer due to remote work. And as a result of social distancing, the physical layout will not be suitable for all firms. There may be an increase in demand for the WeWork space model as well. There's also a need to just feel safe, and some will want to leave a highly dense city from both a residential and office space environment. So that takes care of the residential market, a little bit about the office market. And I know our next speaker is a housing developer, Ken Carney, but I don't want to take anything away from what Ken is going to speak about. I just had a couple of quick comments to add about rental housing. You know, I've been an advocate for affordable housing for over 3 decades, and I completely understand there's an affordable housing crisis, and it will only be magnified because of this pandemic. The moratorium on evictions has just extended. It's been extended just yesterday from 3 months to 5 months. This is good for those who have maybe lost income, but there are 2 major issues and concerns. One, the property owner just lost up to 40% or more of their revenue, which will put them at risk of not paying their own bills, including the mortgage, including taxes, maintaining the property, and covering utilities if the landlord is paying utilities on behalf of the tenant. 2, the rental arrears will need to be paid at some point, and it will become increasingly difficult for tenants, especially those who have lost income, to pay 5 months worth of back rent. The loss of residential and commercial rents may also reduce the value of property, assuming an income approach. This could also lead to a reduced assessed value and then potential loss for taxes on the municipal side and on the school district side. No one really knows what will happen, and I offer those comments to help move this conversation forward. The road to recovery, let's just say it will be bumpy, but we are resilient and the economy will come back. It's just a question of when. My educated guess is at least 18 months, likely 3 years.
Well, Joe Czajka, I said originally that you were an encyclopedia. I think you are Encyclopedia Britannica. Thank you so much for those comments. And now let's turn to Mr. Carney. We talk about what is ahead of us and what is the immediate impact, but more importantly, Ken, with your tremendous experience and success, 2 things come to mind turning it over to you. A tolerance for ambiguity and a tolerance for risk. So, Mr. Carney, what immediate impacts and what are going to be the lingering impacts? I can see it already in my law firm, tax certiorari proceedings exponentially increasing. So, where are we going? What are you thinking?
Well, hello, Rick. Thank you for hosting this event today, and thank you to Pattern for organizing it. The times we're in are certainly uncertain. There is no precedent. There is no barometer to compare it to. I wasn't around for the Great Depression, but the first crash in 1987, crash in 2007, 2008, the attack on 9/11, nothing economically could prepare us for what the environment we're in, and the environment that we will be working in for the next for the foreseeable future. The impacts I see are this: we concentrated the last 5 or 6 years. Sean and I concentrated on rebirth of certain urban centers throughout the Hudson Valley. When I started 30 years ago, I was in Beacon when it was a rundown river town. We've been able to go back to Beacon. We've worked in Peekskill. We've worked in Poughkeepsie. We have 4 different downtown revitalization projects upstate that are still moving forward. And it's an interesting dynamic now, right? Because the virus has attacked and has flourished in the more dense areas. Some of the urban centers that we were trying to rebuild seem to have some of the highest rates. So what are the impacts? I think the largest impact is the heart of our economy, which is our proximity to New York City. What has occurred in New York City is unimaginable. And I believe that there will be a flight from New York City. Is it going to be sustainable? Will it last 1 year, 2 years? After 9/11, it dissipated after about 18 to 24 months, and then there was a return to normalcy. But to Joe's point, if you combine this with also the dynamic of the X-Geners and the Millennials reaching the age to have children, there was a cohort of X-Geners and Millennials that were looking to move anyway once they had children. Some were staying in the urban centers. I believe they will be the first ones to leave and look to come up to the Hudson Valley to raise a family. So I think it's going to accelerate their plans. I don't believe that the singles coming out of college, looking to live in an urban center in New York City, I don't believe that phenomenon is going to change. I think that will continue for the foreseeable future. Singles want to live downtown. Whether you're single or a family, the renters and the home buyers of today are seeking a lifestyle. We need to produce products that enhance a lifestyle. Living in an urban center has its own lifestyle, its own synergy. But if you get outside of an urban center, you have to create a lifestyle. We have a few examples of that throughout the Hudson Valley, where developers have they've joined housing with restaurants and retail and medical office, and I believe that model will flourish as we move forward. Real estate as a whole, obviously retail, this just accelerated the downward spiral some retail was on. Hospitality, some hotels are not going to reopen. Some restaurants are not going to reopen. So the ancillary impacts of that, all the people that supply those hotels and restaurants, the people who work there, those people rent from us. Those impacts cannot be measured at this time. I do think that there will be opportunities if certain communities are proactive to identify areas that could be rezoned. We had a phone call this past week with an elected official and said, listen, I'm looking down the road, I'm looking at an $8 to $9 million shortfall, but yet we have a couple of retail strips that just aren't working in town. What do you think? And my suggestion was an overlay district where you do mixed use, give some density, build some housing, and that'll work. In regards to housing, similar to an office building downtown, I think we're a long, long way away from seeing an office building where you walk in and you go to an elevator bank that serves 5,000 to 7,000 people. I don't see that in the foreseeable future. I also think the high rises, the 14, 16-story high rise, will not be as attractive to somebody, let's say, coming out of the city and looking to go to a smaller urban center. I think the models where you build not the old garden-style apartments, but we've worked in a couple areas where the elected officials have said, hey, we will let you build multifamily, but we want a separate entrance, similar to what Joe said. Don't have a common area. Don't have a common area. Have a separate entrance for each unit. It's costly, but it can be done. And that model has worked in northern Westchester in the last 10 to 15 years. I see that occurring. We are pushing forward with a townhouse project in northern Westchester in Somers. We haven't stopped. I was just there an hour ago, and we are getting cold calls on interest. We haven't started the marketing yet. We probably will in a month. We've made some changes. We've taken out where the basement was and 2-car garage, maybe 1-car garage. We've changed it around. The lower level lends itself to a fitness center for equipment. It also lends itself to a home office. We are advertising, and we will market this as either 2 or 3 bedroom townhomes, and that third bedroom could be converted to an office. Every townhouse has an individual entrance, and what's interesting, Joe was talking about townhouse developments. Some of the amenities we don't have here. It was a smaller site. Some of the amenities we don't have, and we thought a common pool and would work against us. I think that actually works for us now. I'm not so sure that a common pool area is going to be very attractive in the next few years. We will know, I believe this townhouse development and our market rate development in Beacon will be a very good barometer for where the market is. Next month, we're going to start marketing our market rate development in Beacon, adjacent to City Hall. They're all 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, and we think the demand is going to be very high. So moving forward, the impacts are severe. Financially, there's a pause right now. There's a pause. We heard late last night that some deals funded that were set to close next month have now been put on pause for a month or so. The tax credit investors in our world, we sell tax credits, are expecting a downturn in the price of credits. The interest in purchasing those credits may also dissipate as the banks do not have gains to offset. So a lot of the impacts are uncertain. We are moving forward with our instincts, and the good news is we've signed since February 28th. We've signed contracts on 2 new properties upstate. We haven't stopped until I have to stop. But we will continue with our downtown model, and I'm hoping that model will continue to flourish. But we're going to make a change, similar to what I was saying before about couples and singles. Our downtown model normally had about 60% 1 bedrooms, 40% 2 bedrooms. We're going to change that. We're going to go more towards 75, 80% 1 bedrooms and 20 or 25% 2 bedrooms, because we feel that the singles will be more interested in living in some of these in these downtown areas. So uncharted times, but I do think there is an opportunity for communities with strong leadership who see who want to get out in front of it. And remember, it's going to change very quickly. So the communities who get out in front early are the ones who are going to benefit the most. Because if you wait to see what the trends are, what the final impacts are, implications, you may be behind the curve.
Also, showing the flexibility has probably made you so successful in terms of being able to change unit design, to move rapidly in anticipation of what's emerging here. And thank you for all of those insights. Just one last quick thing, if I may. Do you have any observations on the review process itself? You being on one side of the table and obviously having to go forward in this new world, would you hope for, and do you think that communities will be responsive, understanding the economic circumstances?
Well, I was listening intently when Jennifer was speaking earlier. I have a one-liner when it comes to the secret process. I compare it to the Roberta Flack song, "Killing Me Softly" with your song. It's killing me softly with the secret process. That's by 1,000 cuts. But I do believe the secret process at times, I agree with Jennifer, that you should go in proactively and look at the impacts and address them. However, we've gone to some towns and said, you know what, we have a mixed income development here. This is not all market rate. If this is an EIS, we're out of here. And we have been able to work and build substantial size developments using a long form with attachments. You get to the same place without the scoping sessions and the public hearings, which sometimes you're just satisfying NIMBY neighbors. So I do think the political will be there from the elected officials, realizing that there is an impetus to get some of these projects done now, as I said previously, and stay ahead of the curve. It can be done. We just got a project approved in Rome, New York, in 2 meetings. 2 meetings. And that was incredible. 2 meetings, a 70-unit downtown revitalization initiative project. We worked very closely with the planning department. So if the will is there, it can get done. And hopefully, the Hudson Valley leadership will recognize this and put a vehicle in place to move these projects forward.
You know what? We can only hope. Jennifer and I had an interesting experience not too far from Rome, New York, representing a casino that brought in a special counsel, and we were able to get a casino approved with a negative declaration because there was a will to get it done, and it was done properly through a very, very detailed long-form EAF. Well, speaking of that whole process, let's turn to Brandy Nelson, who obviously is in the trenches out there and doing the design and trying to make sure that projects get approved. Brandy, as we now emerge from this cocoon and try to unpause, what are you seeing in terms of infrastructure demands? Are you anticipating, from an engineering perspective, a receptivity that might exist in terms of going forward? And what about changes that were mentioned by Ken in terms of changing of design, in terms of recreation and open space? What are your thoughts?
Well, Rick, thank you, and thank you to Patterns for inviting me to participate, and I appreciate being able to offer some commentary with the rest of the panel group here. It's a great group. Infrastructure is interesting, always challenging. Patterns has done a number of studies in the past about the challenges with infrastructure in many of our communities, and we have, billions of dollars in the state of New York worth of backlog in infrastructure improvements that need to be made. Fortunately, the governor's executive orders have allowed quite a few infrastructure projects to continue as essential projects. So in some respect, ongoing projects pertaining to water and sewer infrastructure have been continuing. I'd like to take just a moment just to talk about the challenges associated with construction. I think communities now are going to be grappling with how to support their own staff performing infrastructure repairs, but also there'll be challenges to contractors, and Ken may have commentary on follow-up about how construction teams are functioning in this new environment. We are finding that the expectation as to cost has not really shaken out yet. Some people have thought that with this pause that there would be opportunities to have projects come in at a more cost-effective budget, and in some cases we're seeing the reverse. The costs are actually higher because there are longer timeframes that need to be planned for as infrastructure goes in. There are more cautious steps that are taken during the infrastructure construction process to protect essential workers from potential exposure. And there are still a number of unanswered questions around risk and liability to municipalities, to contractors, to owners, developers, related to construction activity. So I think that that's a big area that is yet to really be understood. And there's a wide range of thought as to how to best accomplish construction projects. That said, I think there's a realization of the importance of keeping infrastructure projects moving for the benefit of our economy and for the benefit of our communities. And when I'm talking infrastructure, I just want to be clear, we're talking water, sewer, roads, bridges, and telecommunications, but also energy and waste management. We've seen that there's opportunity right now to increase road and bridge repair work because the level of traffic has decreased, so that actually eases the construction effort. With waste management, we've seen some interesting feedback. There was a mayor in a Hudson Valley city who was announcing to people, slow down on what you're throwing away because we can't keep up with the waste hauling. So, normally we get up in the morning, we prepare for work, and then we depart. We commute out of our bedroom community to an urban center for our work. Now with working from home, the water use, the sewer use, the energy use, the waste generation all occurs out of our home. And so municipalities are having to rebalance the use of infrastructure in their communities. That will probably put strain on existing infrastructure, but it may also create opportunities for communities to be supportive of projects that allow for expansion of infrastructure. And I think the real question around infrastructure, when you talk to folks in economic development, and Peter and Joe may have some commentary on this, is whether or not there'll be some additional funds that become available through either federal stimulus projects or federal stimulus funds, and then how that will be distributed to the communities in our area. Many communities are starting to queue up what would be considered shovel-ready projects so that they can be ready to go as funding sources become available. But as Jennifer pointed out, there'll be the question of ratables as well, and so not wanting to maybe take on too much debt if they're concerned about the rest of the economy. The other thing we're seeing is that, I think, to Ken's point, to Jennifer's point, having some flexibility with zoning may be important. We do a fair amount of work with commercial real estate, and some essential businesses are wanting to really have more opportunity for drive-through and pickup types of arrangements. And so I can see a scenario where there'll be a lot of site plan amendments where companies want to come in and they want to add a drive-through or a pickup component. That changes traffic patterns that'll need to be evaluated, changes parking scenarios and how parking lots are used. And not all zoning codes allow for things like drive-throughs. So we may see a trend in that direction as well. Lastly, I think to the point about commercial office space, we had seen a trend towards densification in commercial office space. With the plans that the governor's office is asking to be put in place for returning to work, and that densification really being mandated to diminish, I think that we'll see less occupancy in office space. And I don't know what that means. That's a question for Ken as far as what does that mean to the real estate market. But will that result in the need for new construction? Will it create opportunities, as Jennifer suggested, to expand into spaces that are underutilized currently? Or will we all just simply find a way to work from home? Quite a few questions out there in the infrastructure world. But again, I think pending flexibility from municipalities and funding from the federal government, the infrastructure market will obviously be strong, as it's essential to just day-to-day operations.
You mentioned flexibility, Brandy, and obviously also you mentioned the possibility of amendments to existing site plans in light of everything that we've just experienced. I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts or recommendations in terms of, and quickly, efficiency in terms of the application process, and how might this be expedited before planning boards?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that we're seeing really a real mix of communities embracing technology as a way to expedite this process. So, whatever we can do, either as applicants or municipal engineers, municipal officials, to help embrace technology and leverage the ability to send digital plans and applications to boards, agree to host Zoom meetings. We need both the willingness on the part of the municipality and the flexibility on the part of both the applicant and the municipality to engage in technology and using it to its fullest potential to keep applications moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you. Very interesting. Peter, here you are. You're the planner. You're going to take us into the 21st and 22nd century. And we have now an opportunity to really, really use the expertise, experience, and knowledge of planners and hopefully help us formulate a plan going forward. What kinds of trends are you anticipating in terms of design changes? What do you think is going to happen in terms of comprehensive planning, which is obviously something under New York State town law that towns are supposed to be taking into account every 10 years? But I have a sense that it may be happening a little bit quicker these days, because there's going to have to be some dramatic changes if we're going to get out of this.
True, and thank you, Rick, and thank you to Patterns for asking me to participate. I think the thoughts that I wanted to offer are really at a broad-based community scale of development and comprehensive planning. And I think first, as I think all of the panelists have said, it's really important to separate the periods of when we're back to long-term normal operations from the current period of crisis that we're in, and even the short-term recovery, which is going to happen over the next couple of years. And that's because planning in general and land use development specifically, we answer to the long term. We don't answer to the short term, right? In the best of circumstances, Ken's construction projects, once they break ground, right, and not just Ken, they take a couple of years. So construction projects that start today, infrastructure projects that Brandy's working on that start today, aren't coming online for a couple of years. And when communities start to reap the rewards of those projects, whether they're development projects or infrastructure projects, that's years after. So it's really important that when we start thinking about these developments, planning for them in the future, that we're really looking towards the long term. So it doesn't mean that we ignore the short term, right? Far from it. But we do have to keep the current crisis in perspective in terms of its duration compared to the length of the development projects and infrastructure projects and comprehensive plans that we're putting into place. And we really need to draw lessons from the current pandemic and apply them to our comprehensive plans moving forward. But again, I think it's, as everyone said, it's important to understand that what we're experiencing now in the throes of this crisis, what we're going to experience in the next couple of years, is not the new normal, right? This is not the aftermath of Hurricanes Irene, Lee, and Sandy, right? We're not suddenly waking up to find out that we're going to have these storms every couple of years, and now we know that. And as Ken mentioned, right, even after 9/11, New York City did experience a little slowdown, a little exodus, but it came back and it came roaring back, and the population and the economic activity within the city was greater is than ever right before this pandemic. So as it's applied to kind of comprehensive planning, I put all that and what all your other panelists have said together, and I have three thoughts. And I think Joe had mentioned this, Ken mentioned this, but it's critical to remember that the long-term trends that were happening before this pandemic are not going away. They're staying with us. And so a couple of the trends that I think are really critical to remember is that we don't have enough housing in this area, period, right? Hard stop. We have a crisis in supply. Even with a recession, even with a slowdown in the office market, there's not going to be enough housing to meet demand. And so communities need to think about how and where they're going to place that housing and how they're going to build communities around that housing so they're not isolated. The need to build resilient and sustainable developments is not going away, right? Renewable energy development, transit-oriented development, the need to support transit, focus on public infrastructure, these things aren't going away. And I think one of the other big things that we're learning is that people want to be near people. And that was always a truism. And I think that was always a truism in planning. And I think in the short term, I think absolutely maintaining social distance is critical. And it will be critical that our site plans and developments accommodate that in the short term. But at some point, we will be past this crisis. And if working at home has taught me anything, it's that people want to be near people. I think the death of offices has been written many times, and I don't think it's going to happen. I do think it's going to change pretty dramatically. And I think what's going to happen is we're going to see a continuation of the trends that we saw before the pandemic. I'm not talking about Manhattan level density everywhere, right? That's not what's going to happen. That was never what was going to happen. But we could be seeing, as Ken and Joe were saying, these live, work, play developments. But we also could be seeing a return to kind of well-designed neighborhoods, village centers, hamlet centers, where there's people-centered design. And that's incredibly important because it's consistent with our other planning goals, our sustainability goals, our resilience goals. And the last kind of piece I'll put in that long-term trend is that public goods are good. I think communities are going to start realizing that. And that, as Ken said, if communities wait to react to this, they're going to be behind the curve. And what was true before the pandemic is true after the pandemic, that parks make communities, streets make communities. The design of those streets and whether people can walk on them and bike on them and how they fit people is going to continue to be incredibly important. And I don't think communities should back away from that. The second big thought I have about big picture thought I have about comprehensive planning is now might actually be, maybe in a couple months, it might actually be a really great time to gather some unique insights into our communities. We might actually get some really interesting answers, be able to compare them to the answers we got from our community in our last comprehensive plan, even if it was a year ago. For instance, our residents might be able to answer hypothetical questions a little better, right? We always, as planners, we put out these hypothetical questions. What if there were no cars on the street? What would you want your streets to be? And people are like, well, that's never going to happen. I can't even imagine it. Well, now people can, right? So what are you seeing out there? What would you want your streets to be if there were no cars? Now, it's not saying you design the streets for no cars. That's never going to happen. But are they places where people can get out and just do the basic minimum of activity? Can they walk on the sidewalk safely? Can they push a stroller? Can kids ride a bike? Can they use the street safely just to get around? How accessible are our communities in reality to the items of daily living? Can we get to grocery stores, drug stores? Can we just walk around the neighborhood and see the squirrels playing, see the birds? What can we do? I think communities that start looking at those types of questions and getting those types of answers from their community are really going to be far ahead, because they're going to be the communities that are focusing on people and what people want. And I think that is not going to change. We might also find that this might be a unique opportunity to really tap into the empathy of the residents within our communities. We might be able to get some really good answers to questions like, what do you think other people in your community would want to see? What do you think your neighbors really wanted, really needed during this pandemic that maybe they couldn't get, or maybe they did get that was critically important? And we might be able to tap into this kind of empathy divide and really reflect that back to our communities and really get some pretty interesting insights. And then perhaps, third, I would say maybe it's wishful thinking, but potentially this is a moment for cutting through some of the um, less attractive parts of comprehensive planning or the secret process, where they are used to kind of slow things down or stop progress or development. And maybe this is an opportunity that communities have to cut through some of that. If we've identified as a community our major goals, sustainability and resiliency, people-centered design, parks and open space, what does that really mean in totality? Does sustainability mean more than preserving all open space at any cost? Does it also mean encouraging the right kind of development? Does it mean encouraging sustainable development and resilient development that has some density in appropriate places? Can we really start to embrace those goals? Can we start to embrace on the affordable housing side? Can we start to embrace the whole affordable housing goals and not just say, we're going to have 10% set asides, which is incredibly important. Inclusionary zoning plays an incredible role in affordable housing, but we know we have a supply issue. So can we start to embrace all of these issues when we find out that the essential workers in our community can't afford to live here? That's a problem. And it's not going to be addressed by a 10% set aside. It's going to be addressed by changing the way that we think about our communities and how we design for our communities to be places where our essential workers live. They're our neighbors. Maybe community character doesn't mean just, prohibiting McMansions. Maybe community character looks at the physical design of our parks, of our sidewalks, of our open space, how accessible these places are. And again, really getting back to that people-centered design. And so I don't mean to dismiss the short term. I think it's incredibly important. A small movement of people out of New York City, even for a short period of time, is going to have a pretty dramatic impact on the Hudson Valley. And all the more reason, in my planner's opinion, to focus on these really critical pieces of community planning, going back to the basics and saying, what kind of communities do we really want? And I think, as Ken said, if communities wait, they'll be behind the curve. In 10 or 20 years, you're going to reap the benefits from the items that you start planning for now and that go into construction in a year or 2 or 3 years. That's what you're going to see in 20 years. So communities that reflect on the current situation and grow from it, that don't ignore the underlying realities and kind of jump on a quick bandwagon, that have confidence to really implement their visions, and really kind of focus on people-centered design. In my opinion, that's going to be those are going to be the communities that have the best chance of thriving in a decade from now. Because I think cloistering is not what people want. It's not going to be the long-term future, and I think it's important that we remember that. So those are a couple of my thoughts. I appreciate the opportunity to give them.
Peter, thank you. Very, very thought-provoking. And actually, what's remarkable about your comments, it ties together every single participant on this panel. What you were talking about, whether it's a road specification, how about what's that going to require? People are now walking. People are riding bikes more frequently. And if we're going to be integrating and thinking about moving forward, we're going to have to make some changes. And there are going to be legal changes in terms of highway specifications. The standard 50-foot wide dedication, perhaps it's going to have to be a little bit wider. Maybe we have to provide for bike lanes in terms of all future development. And so too, that then, not only from a legal perspective, is from an engineering perspective, because that impacts infrastructure, from a planning perspective. And obviously, Ken Carney, in terms of building a new community, has to take into account all of these things. This has been a wonderful discussion, and I think what we need to do is just go to a 60-second round here, if I may, and provide everyone an opportunity just to provide a very quick comment of what we've learned from each other and perhaps some closing remarks. And we'll start right from the top. Jennifer, your thoughts.
Sure. Thank you, Rick, and thank you for everybody's comments. This has been a great discussion. One thing that came to mind, hearing Ken talk about his restaurant tenants and hearing Peter talking about short-term versus long-term, and Brandy speaking about flexibility with zoning is, one of the aspects of the governor's, come back to work plan is for restaurants to offer outdoor dining, but a lot of municipalities don't have that flexibility currently in their zoning code to have outdoor dining, and it can at times create a lot of problems if it's right next door to a residential area, or you have apartments above the restaurant, if it's a bar/restaurant. So I think we're going to be looking at some short-term issues in trying to accommodate for that outdoor dining to help our businesses. But also, I don't know that municipalities are going to want to make that a long-term change in their zoning. So we may be needing, from a legal perspective, to look at that issue creatively to figure out maybe not necessarily a zoning amendment, but an administrative temporary permit, license agreement, something like that to assist municipalities in getting those businesses open.
Good comment. Joe, what do you think?
Sure, Rick. So, the opportunity to rethink, the opportunity to redesign, and the opportunity to recover from this mess, I think is critical. It's going to create something within a municipality, those who want to move ahead quickly, it's going to create something called certainty. When a developer has a level of certainty with mitigated risk, that means they're going to want to be in that community. They're going to want to build that housing. And when you do invite a developer in, especially those creating affordable housing units, you have to realize that that developer, they're going to do it better than everybody else because they're under the magnifying glass all the time. So that industry is critical, and it needs to be supported within the municipality. And my last comment, going back a little bit to what Peter had indicated, essential workers. All of a sudden, we have a lot of essential workers out in the playing field. Who are they? The people in the healthcare, first responders, grocery clerks, people in the service industries, the people we count on every single day. Municipalities are, I think, and everybody else realizing who they are, and those are the folks we want to live in our communities. So when it comes down to the planning board, zoning board, school board, those are the folks we want there. Think of these essential workers today and remember who they are, what they're doing, and that we need to provide housing for them in the future.
Thank you, Joe. And we're going to turn to Ken here in a moment, but the problem is that, unfortunately, and Ken mentioned it, you go before a board, oftentimes you find out right away, do you want me in there, or am I going to be spending 4 or 5 years and a couple $1 million in soft costs to get through? Or am I welcome, and do you want the tax ratables and quality development? The borders are closed. The Chinese built a wall 8 centuries ago. Anyway, long story, but Ken, your thoughts?
Well, this has been a great conversation. A lot of plans and a lot of models we've talked about is predicated on resources. Right now, there's a flight from capital. Capital is nervous. They don't know what the future holds. Our municipalities are looking at huge deficits. The state is looking at a $15 billion deficit. The governor's leadership since this pandemic hit has been phenomenal. He's been a national leader. New York has participated in the past when other states have been hit with national disasters such as Katrina and so forth. Last year, California got assistance for the wildfires. What New York State has gone through, New York City in particular, in the last 2 to 3 months is unprecedented. It's time for Washington to do the right thing and send money back to the municipalities here in the state of New York so that some of these plans that we've talked about today can become a reality. So we need that, and we need leadership. You need leadership on the local level. As Peter said, don't be behind the curve. Get out in front, be bold. This is what it's going to take. These are tough times. You have to, we have to get out there, and we're going to take chances. We don't always get it right. But we're going to get it right more times than we get it wrong. So we need the resources from Washington to help us out. What's fair is fair. And then we need leadership on the local level. And with those two things and some of these planning mechanisms, I think our recovery will be well on its way.
Brandy, go out there and get us some infrastructure, will you? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I could completely agree with Ken's comments there and really would like to second them. Federal stimulus dollars to help support ongoing infrastructure investment is absolutely essential. But, to speak to what Peter said as far as opportunities in our communities now, both municipal leaders and developers can look at leveraging existing resources in communities. Where is there underutilized infrastructure? Where are there underutilized buildings? And really try and focus there, try and work within the framework of the zoning that we have, because it does take time to amend zoning. But, where we can create opportunities on the resources we already have, that is sustainable, that is cost effective, and that allows us to move quickly in these times. And one last point I just want to make is, as far as amenities are concerned, I think the one thing we've all realized living in the Hudson Valley is that the outside is absolutely key. It gives us opportunity to refresh our spirits and let our kids have some fresh air and give a place for seniors to get some exercise. And so that kind of amenity is just so critical. And where we can preserve and enhance those amenities in the Hudson Valley, I think it just only improves the lifestyle here in the Valley.
Wonderful. And Peter, what have you to say in closing?
Well, I think that, everyone hit on it, right? We kind of understand what we need to be doing as a region and as a community. And as Jen said, the tools are there under SECRA to help us get there. And as you said, Rick, the tools are there if they're used appropriately. We can get through this. We can make the changes that we want to make as a community if we have the willingness to do it and the fortitude to do it. And, straight from the horse's mouth, Ken said, I'll be there if you as a community want me there, and we'll design the infrastructure that meets your needs, but be willing to go do it and to invest in your community. Doesn't have to be huge investments. It can be repurposing infrastructure that you have, repurposing space, focusing on improvements to your accessibility, to your parks, to your sidewalks, slowing down traffic in neighborhoods so kids feel safe to bike. I mean, little things like that start to add up really quickly. It was good planning before. It's going to continue to be good planning. And this only reinforces it. And I think if we can focus on that, I think we're going to be moving in the right direction.
Thank you, panelists. It's been a pleasure for me to serve as moderator. I believe that we've hit on some really thought-provoking ideas here in terms of how we emerge from all of this. And I consider you to be the leaders that are going to lead us out of this. And thank you to Pattern for Progress. Pattern is an organization that thrives on thought and planning and quality of living being very important to the Hudson Valley. And it's been my pleasure to be involved with Pattern for quite some time. And we look forward to working with Pattern and know that it will assist all of us in emerging from this crisis that we're in. Thank you. Take care.